Hello Yele Nation. Today's tutorial is on how to recreate this beautiful puff petal sleeves or overlapping sleeves, anyhow you want to call it. It is what it is. So the first thing I'm going to take is my sleeve pattern. If you have not seen my video on how to create a sleeve pattern, please go and check it out. Check it out. Please. I've begged you like 3 times now, so please check it out. So I'm taking my sleeve pattern now and I'm going to create a smaller pattern from it. So the sleeve that I'm making is bigger than my sleeve pattern, so that's why I added a little bit excess on the side. I added like 0.5 inches to 1 inch at the side to make the sleeve a little bit bigger than the pattern that I already have. So if you already have your own pattern, you can always use that style to create a bigger sleeve if the client that you are creating it for is bigger than the pattern that you already have, and you can always make it smaller if the client is smaller than the pattern that you already have. So after creating my smaller pattern, I just created something that is like about 8 inches long. So I'm going to place the pattern and trace out my front, because the front and back dip is different from each other. They're different from each other, so that's what I'm doing. And then I'm going to cut out the dip and whatever, everything like that. So now I have my pattern like this. Look at it, they look alike, or they're replicas of each other but the small way. So the first thing that I want to do now is to take my pencil and I'm going to draw a center line on my new pattern. So I'm going to draw a center line at the middle of my new pattern, and then on either side of that center line I'm going to measure 3 inches. You can measure 4 inches, depends on how much of an overlap you want, but I think 3 is a nice average for an overlap or petal sleeve. So I'm then going to take my curve ruler and then I'm going to draw a curve from that 3 inches mark all the way to the bottom like this. And then I'm also going to do it on the other side, because that part represents the other overlap of the first overlap to create the petal overlap. You get what I'm saying? I know you get it. So after doing that, I'm then going to take another pattern piece, because you see that we have 2 overlaps, and then I'm going to take my tracing wheel to trace out the first overlap. So I'm going to trace out my front pattern on my tracing wheel like you're seeing me do now. I'm going to trace the sides and I'm going to trace the curve, overlap and everything. So after tracing it out, I know you cannot see the trace that I did, but if you use a tracing wheel, you're going to definitely see it. It's just not obvious on my camera right now. So I'm going to use my scissors to cut out what my tracing wheel traced, and then we are going to move on to the next stage of this. So this is what my tracing wheel traced, and this is the front pattern, as you can see. And since my other pattern already has the curve, I'm just going to cut out my curve like this to make the back pattern of it. You see, as simple as it is, that is how simple you want your overlap to be. So and then I'm going to mark my middle of that. I use my first pattern to get the middle, and I'm going to just draw my middle line on this my front pattern. The back pattern already has the middle line, so I don't need to draw it. So I'm going to then place middle line to middle line like this. And if you are not recreating a puff, this is enough for a regular sleeve pattern or a regular petal sleeve pattern, a regular overlapping petal pattern. But I want the puff at the middle, so I'm going to use my slash and spread method to create a spread in the middle or at the edge of my pattern, like the way you are seeing me do, in order to create that extra puff that is going to make the sleeve puff, that is going to make the sleeve proud, that we are going to make the sleeve like a SpongeBob SquarePants. No, this one is SpongeBob Coffee Pants. So that is what we are going to do now. So after, I'm going to then take another piece of paper, place my spreaded new pattern on that piece of paper in order to create the puff. So I don't know if my slant is enough, so I'm going to try to create another slant, and I'm going to cut another slash right here at the middle point in order to create even more puffiness at that middle. So it depends on how puffy you want it to be. One slash could be enough, but for me, because I'm extra like that, I decided to create 2 slashes so that I will have more space to puff up at that middle pattern. So I'm now using the paper tape to sellotape down my opened or slashed sleeve on top of the new paper, like you are seeing me do, just like that. Then after doing all of that, I'm then going to retrace my pattern piece. So I measured the slashes in between. The slashes were about 1.5 to 1 inch, depend on your preference. So now I'm tracing out my curve back on my new paper, like you are seeing me do, and then I'm going to cut out the curve. Now after cutting out the curve, look at it, this is exactly what you want. Look at that. So now you see I can pleat that middle part. I can pleat it as much as I want, or I can pleat it big, I can pleat it small, but I'm showing you what the pleat looks like if you want to pleat it like on a fabric or whatever. You see that puff? Exactly, that's the puff we are going for after, you know, the slash and spread that we are doing. Now I'm going to repeat this same method for the front, and now I have my two patterns ready. Now I'm going to then open up my fabric and create 2 layers of my fabric. So 2 layers of my fabric, and I'm going to place the back pattern on those 2 layers, cut it out, and I'm also going to do the same thing for the front pattern. So that means you need 4 layers of fabric at the end of it all, because you are creating for 2 sleeves. Okay, you are creating for your right sleeve and for your left sleeve, and that's you know what I mean by 2 layers of fabric. But if you are creating for only 1 sleeve, which is probably doesn't make any sense to create for 1 sleeve, you just need 1 layer per pattern. So I notched the part where I notched. So when I put my pattern piece on the fabric, for example, I notched exactly where the stopping of the pleating is going to be on. Let me show you what I mean. So I take my pattern piece and I place it on my fabric, and then at that edge where the last the last paper tape is, that edge, that is exactly where I'm going to notch, because that is where my pleat is going to stop. So I notch it on the other part of the sleeve as well. So the next thing that we want to do now is to tape the bottom, or to hem the bottom of our 2 different pieces. So I'm going to hem the bottom of the pieces, and this is what I have. The hem was about 0.25 inches hem, so it was like 0.25 upon 0.25. That's how I created the hem. That's because this does not have a lining. My client did not want a lining for it, but if you want to line it, then you don't need to hem it. You can just line each of the pieces with each other. So the next thing that I'm going to do now, I folded my slashes, the slash that I did earlier, I folded it so that it will become the original pattern piece, because I wanted to know the difference between the slashed part and the unslashed part. Like I wanted to know what the excess was. So I measured the unslashed and I add about 4 inches, and then from that notch that I created earlier, I measured my fabric. My fabric was 8 inches, so that means it was twice the length. So what I'm going to do now is to run a gather stitch on it. I ran a gather stitch on that curve to the point where my notch was, where my snip was, I mean, and then I'm going to just squeeze it up to make it 4 inches again, because remember that without the slashed parts, when I measured it, it was 4 inches long to the place where my pleating is supposed to stop. So I'm going to measure my gathers now and see how long it is. It is exactly 4 inches, so I have that. It's about 4 inches, so I have that exact amount of pleats that I need. So I'm measuring it again. I think it wasn't 4 inches before. Now it is 4 inches. Pardon me. Pardon. So now I'm going to do the same thing for the other side of the sleeve as well. I'm going to gather it and then make sure that it is also 4 inch on this side as well. Let me check this one. I think this one is about 4 inches. Yes, this one adds sense. It was exactly 4 inches. It didn't stress me. So what I'm going to then do now, remember my this is 4 inches. I'm measuring it again. I don't know why I'm measuring it again, but yeah, I measure it again, you know, because I'm very thorough like that. Yeah, right. So now I'm going to place both of them together. Notch, remember the notch? I'm going to place the notch to the top and the other side again to the notch, and then I'm going to sew that upper area together, and then I'm also going to sew the sides together. So I'm going to place it side to side and also sew that part together. So that's 2 parts that I'm going to sew: the upper part notch to notch and the side of my sleeve. So after sewing it, this is what I have. It looks very nice, right? It looks very nice. It is coming together. Look at that puff. Look at the sleeve. Oh, lovely, lovely baby. Mwah, mwah, mwah. I love it. Now I'm going to then attach this to my main dress. So I have my main dress here, and I'm going to put the seam of my petal sleeve to the seam of the armhole, seam to seam. If you've seen me fix a sleeve before on any of my previous channels, you know that I always start sleeve to sleeve and then work my way round about the armhole of the dress that I'm attaching the sleeves to. So I'm going to place them inside very well, put the puff area on the upper seam, and then I'm going to just sew it inside like that. Now after sewing the inside, this is what I have. My sleeve is ready. My beautiful, petal or overlap sleeve is ready, and it looks beautiful, doesn't it? Don't mind my British accent. The entire dress and the sleeves were inspired by Bridgerton, so I have to represent the British people. Okay, so now let me show you the sleeves again. I hope you recreate it. Tag me on Instagram if you do. I would love to see what you make from it. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Bye.